Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Talking in the last segment about an American citizen who right now is being left to rot in an Iranian prison subject to daily interrogations and beatings by our own government, an American citizen. And our State Department could care less because that his religious liberty and his rights as an American citizen have been completely trashed by a foreign government, by an Islamic government. Again, ladies and gentlemen, there is no compatibility between Islam and America. They cannot coexist. Every advance of Islam in America comes at the expense of liberty, comes at the expense of freedom, comes at the expense of the Constitution. It must not be allowed to take root and spread in the United States. Now, and yet we basically have Sharia law here. I'm looking at two stories. There is a Jewish inmate. Now, he's behind bars, and that's where he ought to be. He's on death row for killing 3 people. But he went to court to get permission to pray with his fellow Jews because he says that's what my religion teaches me to do. If I pray in my cell, there's a toilet in there. It's an unclean place to pray. I need to be freed from my death row cell in order to be able to pray with other Jewish inmates in the prison chapel on the Jewish Sabbath. And the court said, no, you can pray in your cell. Throw a sheet over your toilet and pray in your cell. Now, here's a story about John Walker Lind. And that's just a recent story about him being denied the right to pray in the prison chapel. He's got to pray in his cell. Throw a sheet over your toilet and you can pray in your cell. Now, this is a story from Indianapolis Associated Press. An American convicted of fighting alongside the Taliban must be allowed to pray daily in a group with other Muslim inmates at his high-security prison in Indiana. The judge blocked, a federal judge, Jane Magnus Stinson, blocked the prison from enforcing its ban on daily group prayer. Now, the deal was the same. The prison said, look, you can pray in your cell. We're not going to stop you from praying, but you were apprehended on the battlefield trying to help the Taliban kill American soldiers. That's why he's in this high-security prison. He tried to kill American soldiers, help the Taliban do it. We apprehended him, locked him up, and he says, I know I can pray in my cell, but that's not enough. That does not meet the requirements of the Quran. Now, you got this Jewish prisoner. He's on death row. He says, look, praying in my cell doesn't meet the requirements of the Torah. Judge said, tough darts. You're stuck with it. Throw a sheet over the toilet and pray in your cell. But this Muslim guy, and remember, he was a Muslim convert, grew up as an American as you and me, grew up in a religious home, a Christian home. But he goes to this judge and says, look, praying in my cell by myself, even though I tried to kill American soldiers, does not meet the requirements of the Quran. And my version of Islam requires me to pray every day with other Muslims. Now, the prison officials tried to say, look, it's the same restriction for everybody. Every inmate falls under the same rule. We don't care whether they practice Santeria, whether they're Christians, whether they're Hindus, whether they're Buddhists, whether they're atheists, whether they're Jews, whether they're Muslims. It's the same restriction for all inmates. And if we're to make an exception for this guy, that would be dangerous because we know what this guy's capable of. That's why he's behind bars. It'd be unaffordable. It's going to require extra layer of security and prison guards to be pulled off of one assignment and applied to watch this guy, and it wouldn't be fair because the Christian inmates don't get that privilege that are in the same high security situation. The Jewish prisoners don't get that kind of privilege, but and government witnesses testified that Muslims operate like gangs under the guise of religious activity, and they are the majority of the inmates in this unit. And so government witnesses come to this judge and they say, look, they claim this is all about religion. They're just operating as a gang, and when they get together to pray, that's where they plan their activities as a prison gang. That's what this is really all about. And this judge said, nope, got to let him do it. So you've got de facto Sharia law, ladies and gentlemen, de facto Sharia law in our federal prison system. Muslims who tried to kill American soldiers getting special breaks that no other prisoners get including Christian and Jewish prisoners. Here's a story from India. And you read about the problems with rape. This story from the New York Times indicates, and this is under Hinduism, indicates that up to 100,000 women a year are killed in India over dowry disputes. In other words, you got a dowry dispute between two families, and the bride's family doesn't cough up the dowry, the woman gets killed. 100,000 a year. This is happening under Hinduism. This is not Islam now. This is Hinduism. And this story says that rape, New York Times, rape is just one facet of a broad range of violence and discrimination that leads to the deaths of almost 2 million women a year. Among the causes are not only sexual violence, but also domestic violence, family disputes, and female infanticide. What's the solution? As always, Christianity. And speaking of Islam and democracy and the incompatibility, here's a Muslim leader in the country of Jordan that says flatly that democracy and elections are actually forbidden in Islam because God is the one that chooses leaders. This is from the Ammon News. That's a Jordanian newspaper. The Jordanian leader of the hardliner Salafi Jihadi said that democracy in its concept as, quote, ruling of the people by the people is in contradiction with Islam's concept of the sovereignty of God's law. Abed Shahade, known as Abu Muhammad al-Tawahi, said that democracy in its common conception is forbidden in Islam, and that participation in the elections is forbidden by Islam. So, you can't get any more straightforward than that. Here you got a Muslim leader saying that democracy is flatly contradictory to the tenets of Islam. And you've seen what's happening in Egypt. Coptic Christians now, there used to be 10% of the population in Egypt were Christians. They were Coptics. They had some protection under Mubarak. Now that that's gone, the Muslim Brotherhood is in charge. They are fleeing for their lives. And I believe the United States of America, we are a Christian nation. We ought to stop taking in Muslim refugees. There's 56 Muslim countries in the world. If a Muslim needs a place of refuge, then let's count on his co-religionists to find a place for him. Let's make the United States a place of refuge for Christians who are fleeing Islamic persecution. Let's open the doors of America to Christians in countries like Egypt, in countries like Iraq, in countries like Syria, who must flee persecution. Let's open our shores to them, and let's make it our priority to provide a refuge for Christians who are fleeing the persecution of Muslims. And it's working. The Muslims are driving Christians out of the Middle East. According to this story from the Times of Israel, only 0.6% of the world's Christians live in the Middle East. According to Pew's newly released December 2012 Global Religious Landscape Study, just 0.6% of the world's 2.2 billion Christians now live in the Middle East and North Africa. Christians make up 4% of the region's inhabitants, drastically down from 20% a century ago and marking the smallest regional Christian minority in the world. 93% of the region is Muslim. So systematically, the Middle East and North African nations have been driving Christians from their shores. And, here's an answer to the question about whether we serve the same God as the Muslims. I contend that we do not. And all you got to do is ask a Muslim, and he'll tell you. You tell a Muslim, look, the God I worship has a son. Does the God you worship have a son? And he will say, no, that's blasphemy. The one true God does not have a son. Anybody believes that, I'm going to cut their heads off. That's what a devout Muslim will tell you. That's a capital crime to say that God has a son. That's blasphemy, and blasphemy is punishable by death in Muslim countries under Islamic law, under Sharia law. So he'll tell you, no, I don't serve the same God that you do. You serve a God that has a son. The true God does not have a son. That's the God that I worship. Now, here is a story from Malaysia where a Muslim leader in Malaysia, which is an Islamic country, is threatening violence against any Christian who uses the word Allah. Johor Islamic Religious Council advisor Datuk Nu Gadut today said that those who allow the abuse of the word Allah can be considered as apostates and should repent immediately. He said the word Allah was the exclusive right of Islam and Muslims. Allah, he says, is our God. You can't even use the name of our God. If you're a Christian, you can't even use the name of Allah to refer to your God. It is the exclusive right of Islam and Muslims. Nu said the Quran had clearly explained that Allah was the exclusive word for Muslims as stated in Surah Al-Taha, verse 14, which means, quote, "Verily, I am Allah. There is no God except me. So worship me and establish prayers for my remembrance." So this Muslim leader says it is clear that whoever says that all religions are the same can be considered as an apostate. So none of this multiculturalism nonsense for Muslims, for devout Muslims, no such thing. Anybody that says all religions are the same and that we all worship the same God is an apostate and is subject, therefore, to the death penalty. And, you know, you've got a rising tide of Islam in the country of France. We've talked about this before, this New Year's Eve thing where they burned up 2,000 cars. Those are all Muslims. I mean, the press sanitizes it. It's disaffected, disgruntled youth. They're all Muslims. And they go around torching cars for fun on New Year's Eve. Same thing they did back in 2005. Now, France is going to the aid of the residents of Mali. They're actually sending their Air Force in there because Islamic extremists are trying to take over the country of Mali. And France has been sending its jet fighters in there to try to provide some defense for these people. And now the Islamist forces in Mali are pledging, they are vowing to strike at the heart of France. Remember, there are 5 million French Muslims in France. They are the ones that were responsible for electing the socialist leader they have. They're going to strike at the heart of France. Back in 2.